when struggling artist Victoria Chen gets a midnight call that her father needs a $3 million heart transplant. She's faced with an impossible choice. Then, mysterious billionaire Nicholas Sterling appears with a shocking proposal: marry him for 1 year, and her father lives. But this marriage contract hides devastating secrets that will shatter everything she believes about love, trust, and sacrifice. Asterisk. Welcome back, beautiful people. Today's story is equal parts drama and devotion. And trust us, you'll be hooked from the very first line. Asterisk, the phone call that shattered Victoria Chen's world came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Just as she was cleaning dried paint from under her fingernails, her cramped studio apartment above the art supply store reeked of turpentine and desperation, the November Seattle rain drumming against windows that never quite sealed properly. She'd been working on a commission piece for 18 straight hours, her back screaming from hunching over the easel, trying to capture something that would pay next month's rent. The caller ID made her stomach drop. Seattle General Hospital. Miss Chen? The voice was clinical, carefully controlled. This is Dr. Martinez from the cardiac unit. Your father has been admitted with severe chest pains. You need to come immediately. Victoria's brush clattered to the floor, leaving a streak of crimson across the hardwood. Her father, Dr. James Chen, had been complaining of fatigue lately, but she'd dismissed it as stress from his volunteer work at the downtown free clinic. At 62, he was supposed to have decades left. How bad? She whispered, already grabbing her jacket from the paint-splattered chair. We're running tests now. I won't sugarcoat this, Miss Chen. His condition is critical. The bus ride through Seattle's rain-slick streets felt endless. Victoria pressed her face against the cold window, watching neon signs blur into watercolor. Streaks as her mind raced. Her father had given up his lucrative private practice 5 years ago to work with underserved communities, trading financial security for purpose. The irony wasn't lost on her that the man who'd spent his life healing others might now be beyond saving. Dr. Martinez met her in the cardiac wing's sterile waiting area. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. Your father suffered a massive myocardial infarction, he explained gently. The damage to his heart muscle is extensive. We've stabilized him, but he needs immediate intervention. Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. What kind of intervention? A heart transplant? The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Without it, he has perhaps weeks, maybe a month if we're fortunate. The financial reality hit her like a physical blow. A heart transplant meant astronomical costs that her father's basic insurance would never cover. Victoria made barely $30,000 a year from her art, cobbling together income from commissions, gallery sales, and weekend shifts at a coffee shop. She had $300 in her checking account and a maxed-out credit card. The surgery alone costs approximately $2 million, Dr. Martinez continued. With post-operative care, immunosuppressive drugs, and rehabilitation, you're looking at close to $3 million total. $3 million. Victoria might as well have been told she needed to buy the moon. There are charity programs, the doctor added, but approval takes months. Your father doesn't have that kind of time. Victoria spent the night curled in a waiting room chair, dozing fitfully between nursing rounds and the electronic beeping of medical equipment. When morning came, she felt hollowed out, her dark hair tangled and her clothes wrinkled beyond redemption. She was fumbling coins into a vending machine for terrible coffee when she heard a voice that made her freeze. Victoria. She turned to find Nicholas Sterling standing in the hospital corridor, looking impossibly put together despite the early hour. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, his dark hair styled with precision that spoke of personal grooming staff. Nicholas Sterling, Seattle's most enigmatic tech mogul. The man who'd built an empire in artificial intelligence and quantum computing. The man who'd been quietly attending her gallery showings for 2 years, always purchasing pieces but never approaching her directly. Nicholas, she managed, surprised. What are you doing here? My grandmother is having some tests done. Green eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must look. You seem distressed. Is everything all right? Something about his genuine concern, or maybe just the exhaustion and fear, made her barriers crumble. She found herself explaining everything, the words spilling out in a torrent of desperation and grief. Nicholas listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When she finished, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. 3 million, he said finally. Victoria nodded, fresh tears threatening. No. It's impossible. I just don't know what else to do. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with some internal decision. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. What if I told you it wasn't impossible? Victoria stared at him. Certain exhaustion had finally broken her mind. What do you mean? What if I could arrange for your father to have the surgery? Here with the best cardiac team on the West Coast. All expenses paid. The coffee. Cup slipped from Victoria's numb fingers, sending hot liquid splashing across the pristine hospital floor. That's not funny, Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. I'm not joking. Nicholas's voice was steady as granite. I can have the money transferred to the hospital within the hour. Victoria felt the world spinning around her, the sterile hospital lights suddenly too bright. Why would you do that? You barely know me. Nicholas glanced around the busy corridor, then gently took her arm, guiding her to a quieter alcove near the elevators. His touch was warm through her thin jacket, and she realized she was trembling. Let's just say I have my reasons, he said quietly. But Victoria, this wouldn't be charity. The word stung, but Victoria forced herself to focus. Nothing in life was free, especially not $3 million from a billionaire. What kind of arrangement? Nicholas studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. Marriage. The word hit her like a physical blow. What? A marriage contract? 1 year? His green eyes never left hers. In exchange, your father gets his surgery and the best post-operative care money can buy. Victoria's mind reeled. You want to buy a wife? Something flickered across Nicholas's face, too quick to interpret. I want to solve a problem we both have. What problem could you possibly have that requires a fake marriage? Nicholas was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. My grandfather's will contains a marriage clause. If I'm not married by my 35th birthday, control of Sterling Industries passes to my cousin Marcus. He paused. My birthday's in 11 months, so find someone else. Someone from your world. I've tried. The admission seemed to cost him something. The women I know, they want something permanent. They want to be Mrs. Nicholas Sterling forever, with all the social status and wealth that entails. I need someone who understands this is business. Victoria stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. Marriage to a stranger, even. Temporarily, felt like selling her soul. But her father was dying 3 floors above them. What would this marriage entail? She heard herself ask. You'd move into my penthouse, attend social functions as my wife. Play the part convincingly. In public. His voice dropped lower. What happens in private would be entirely up to you. The implication hung in the air between them. Victoria felt heat creep up her neck. And after the year, divorce. You get a settlement of $5 million, enough to insure your father. Never worries about medical bills again. Could focus on your art without worrying about rent or survival. $5 million, financial freedom, her father's life. It should have been an easy decision, but something in Nicholas's carefully controlled expression made her hesitate. Why me? She pressed. Really? Nicholas's mask slipped for just a moment, and she saw something raw and vulnerable in his eyes. Before he looked away, because you're the only person I've met in years who doesn't want anything from me. The irony was crushing. Here she was, desperate enough to consider marrying a stranger, and he thought she didn't want anything from him. I need time to think, she said. Your father doesn't have time. The words were gentle but implacable. Dr. Martinez says there's a heart available right now, a perfect match. But it won't wait. Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible choice. When she opened them, Nicholas was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. If I say yes, she whispered, when would we today? I have a judge on retainer. We could be married within the hour, and your father could be in surgery by this afternoon." The clinical efficiency of it made her stomach turn. "You had this all planned." "I'm a businessman, Victoria. I plan for contingencies." His voice softened. "Slightly. But I never planned for this." "For what?" "For caring whether you said yes." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. Victoria thought about her father, probably lying in his hospital bed, wondering if she'd found some miracle. She thought about the canvas waiting in her studio, half finished and already overdue. She thought about a life spent scraping by, always one emergency away from catastrophe. "I need to see him first," she said finally. "I need to tell my father. Something before he goes into surgery." Nicholas nodded. Of course, they rode the elevator to the cardiac unit in silence. Victoria's reflection in the polished doors looked like a ghost, pale and hollow-eyed. Nicholas stood beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and understated. Her father was awake when they entered his room, looking smaller somehow in the hospital gown, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic precision. His face lit up when he saw her, but his smile faltered when he noticed Nicholas behind her. "Dad," Victoria said, taking his hand. "This is Nicholas Sterling. He's going to help with the surgery." James Chen studied Nicholas with the sharp intelligence that had made him such a good doctor. "Help? How?" Victoria looked back at Nicholas, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to her father, knowing that what she said next would change everything. "He's going to be my husband." James Chen's monitoring equipment registered his spike in heart rate before Victoria saw the shock cross his face. "Victoria, what are you talking about? Dad, please don't get upset." She squeezed his hand, feeling how cold and fragile it seemed. "Nicholas is going to pay for your surgery. All of it. And the price for this generosity?" Her father's eyes moved between Victoria and Nicholas, his voice heavy with the weight of a man who understood that nothing came free. Nicholas stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "I need a wife, Mr. Chen. Your daughter needs resources. It's mutually beneficial." Beneficial. James repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "You're talking about my daughter like she's a business transaction." "Because that's exactly what this is," Victoria said quickly, before Nicholas could respond. "Dad, you're dying."
The surgery costs $3 million.
"This is the only way? There has to be another option. Charity programs, medical loans, which take months to process. Months you don't have." Victoria felt tears threatening again. "Please, Dad, let me do this." James was quiet for a long moment, studying Nicholas with the intensity of a man evaluating a threat. "What kind of man purchases a wife?" "The kind who's run out of alternatives," Nicholas replied, his voice surprisingly honest. "I won't pretend this is romantic, Mr. Chen, but I will treat your daughter with respect." "Respect?" James's laugh was bitter. "Do you love her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victoria felt her cheeks burn, suddenly aware of how transactional and cold this all sounded. "I hardly know her," Nicholas said finally. "Then you don't deserve her, Dad. Stop." Victoria's voice was sharper than she'd intended. "This isn't about love or deserving anything. This is about keeping you alive." James looked at his daughter with eyes full of grief. "Victoria, I've lived my life. I've done good work, helped people, raised a daughter I'm proud of. If this is my time, it's not." Victoria's voice broke. "I won't let it be." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors. Finally, James sighed deeply. "If I agree to this surgery, what happens to you?" Victoria glanced at Nicholas, who nodded slightly. "I'll be fine, Dad. Better than fine. After a year, I'll have enough money to never worry again. I can focus on my art, and if something goes wrong, if this man decides he doesn't want to honor his agreement..." Nicholas stepped closer to the bed. "I've prepared a contract, Mr. Chen. Legally binding. Your daughter will be protected." James studied Nicholas for another long moment. "I want to see this contract." "Of course." Nicholas pulled out his phone. "My attorney is waiting downstairs with the documents." 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself in a sterile conference room, staring at a stack of legal papers that would bind her life to a stranger's. Nicholas's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Rebecca Walsh, explained the terms with clinical precision. The marriage contract is for exactly 1 year, Rebecca said. Mr. Sterling will cover all medical expenses for your father, including ongoing care. You'll receive a monthly allowance of $50,000 for personal expenses, plus access to a wardrobe, budget, and household staff. $50,000 a month. Victoria had never seen that much money in her entire life. Upon completion of the year-long contract, you'll receive a settlement of $5 million. The prenuptial agreement protects both parties' assets acquired before the marriage. What about my art? Victoria asked. Anything you create during the marriage remains your intellectual property, Nicholas answered. In fact, I'm prepared to arrange gallery showings, connections with collectors. Consider it an investment in your career. It was too generous, too perfect. Victoria's survival instincts screamed that there had to be a catch. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Nicholas and Rebecca exchanged a glance. There is one. Complication? Nicholas admitted. My family. They can't know this marriage is temporary, my grandmother especially. She's very traditional, and she's been pressuring me to settle down for years. As far as anyone knows, this is a real marriage. So I have to lie to everyone. You have to play a role, Nicholas corrected, a devoted wife who swept me off my feet. Victoria almost laughed at the absurdity. I don't know how to be a billionaire's wife. You'll learn. I'll teach you. The intimacy implied in those words made Victoria's stomach flutter uncomfortably. She looked at the contract again, the legal language blurring together. I need a moment alone, she said. Nicholas and Rebecca stepped outside, leaving Victoria alone with the most important decision of her life. Through the conference room window, she could see her father's floor, where he was probably preparing for surgery that could save his life. She thought about her cramped apartment, the constant struggle to make rent, the half-finished paintings stacked against the walls. She thought about waking up every morning wondering if this would be the day she finally gave up on her dreams and got a real job. $5 million would buy her freedom, but at what cost? When Nicholas returned, she was signing the last page. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice softer than she'd heard it. Victoria looked up at him, this stranger who was about to become her husband. Are you? Something flickered in his green eyes. No. The honesty surprised her. Then why are we doing this? Because sometimes the wrong choice is the only choice left. 2 hours later, Victoria Chen became Victoria Sterling in a brief civil ceremony in the hospital chapel. She wore the same paint-stained clothes she'd had on when her world fell apart, while Nicholas stood beside her in his perfectly tailored suit. The judge's words felt surreal, like dialogue from someone else's life. When it was over, Nicholas kissed her cheek, a brief formal gesture that somehow felt more intimate than it should have. Mrs. Sterling, he said quietly, and something in his voice made her shiver. Her father's surgery began that afternoon. Victoria spent the next 8 hours pacing the surgical waiting room, her new husband working silently on his laptop beside her. They didn't speak much, but she was aware of his presence, the way he occasionally looked up to check on her, the coffee he brought without being asked. At 11:30 p.m., Dr. Martinez emerged from surgery, exhausted but smiling. The transplant was successful, he announced. Your father is going to live. Victoria collapsed into Nicholas's arms without thinking, sobbing with relief against his chest. He held her quietly, his hand stroking her hair, and for a moment it felt almost real. But as they drove through the Seattle night toward his penthouse, the weight of what she'd done began to settle over her like a shroud. She was married to a man she barely knew, committed to a year of living a lie, having second thoughts, Nicholas asked, as if reading her mind. Victoria looked at him, this stranger who was now her husband, and realized that saving her father's life had been the easy part. Just wondering what I've gotten myself into. Nicholas's smile was enigmatic as they pulled into the underground garage of his building. Suppose we'll find out together. Nicholas's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a glass tower that scraped Seattle's clouded sky. Victoria stood in the marble foyer, dwarfed by soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. The space was beautiful and cold, like living inside an architectural magazine. Your room is this way, Nicholas said, leading her down a hallway lined with original artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. He opened a door to reveal a bedroom suite larger than her entire apartment. White and silver, from the king-sized bed to the sitting area by the windows. An adjoining walk-in closet was already filled with designer clothes in her exact size. "How did you know my measurements?" Victoria asked, running her fingers over a silk dress that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "I'm thorough," Nicholas replied, but something in his tone made her look at him more closely. Had he been watching her longer than he'd admitted? "There's an ensuite bathroom through that door, and this connects to my room." He indicated a door she hadn't noticed. "It's locked from your side. You control that boundary." The implication made heat creep up her neck. "What about meals? Household stuff?" "Mrs. Patterson handles the household management. She'll be here tomorrow morning to go over everything." He paused in the doorway. "Victoria, I know this is overwhelming, but you don't have to become someone else. Just be yourself with better clothes." After he left, Victoria sank onto the impossibly soft bed, staring out at the city lights that sparkled like scattered diamonds. 24 hours ago, she'd been scraping paint off her fingernails in a cramped studio. Now she was married to a billionaire, wearing a wedding ring that probably cost more than her car. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a surprisingly warm woman in her 60s who managed to make the sterile penthouse feel slightly more like a home. She explained Victoria's schedule over coffee in the enormous kitchen. "Mr. Sterling has a charity gala tomorrow night," Mrs. Patterson said, consulting a tablet. "Your stylist will be here at 2 to help you prepare, and you have lunch with his grandmother on Thursday." Victoria's stomach nodded. "His grandmother?" "Sterling. She's been anxious to meet you ever since Nicholas called to tell her about the wedding." Mrs. Patterson's eyes twinkled. "What?" "She's a formidable woman, but she has a good heart." The gala was Victoria's first test as Nicholas Sterling's wife. She spent hours with the stylist, a theatrical woman named Celeste, who transformed her into someone she barely recognized. The midnight blue gown hugged her curves like liquid silk, and her dark hair was swept into an elegant updo that left her neck bare. Diamond earrings that Nicholas had casually presented at dinner caught the light like captured stars. "You look beautiful," Nicholas said when she emerged from her room. He wore a black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders, and for a moment, Victoria forgot to breathe. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," she admitted. "You're not playing anything. This is who you are now." He offered his arm, ready to meet Seattle's elite. The gala was held at the Four Seasons, a glittering affair filled with the kind of people Victoria had only seen in gossip magazines. Nicholas guided her through introductions with a practiced ease, his hand possessive on her lower back as he presented her as his wife. "You're the artist," said Margaret Whitman, a society matron dripping in pearls. "Nicholas, you didn't tell us you were marrying someone creative." "Victoria's talent speaks for itself," Nicholas replied smoothly. "In fact, we're planning a showing of her work next month." Victoria shot him a surprised look, but he squeezed her hand gently, a silent signal to play along. The evening progressed in a blur of champagne and small talk. Victoria found herself studying Nicholas, watching how he commanded every room he entered, the way people gravitated toward him seeking his attention or approval. He was charming and distant all at once, never quite letting anyone too close. "You're a natural at this," he murmured, during a quiet moment as they swayed together on the dance floor. "I'm terrified," Victoria confessed, very aware of his hand. At her waist, the way he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely him. "You don't show it." His green eyes searched her face. "You're stronger than you think." Something in his voice made her pulse quicken. For a moment, wrapped in his arms with soft music playing around them, it almost felt real. The spell was broken when a woman approached them, stunning in the way that only came from perfect genetics and unlimited wealth.
Oh.
Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek bob, and her red dress probably cost more than Victoria's art supplies for an entire year. "Nicholas," the woman purred, completely ignoring Victoria. "I heard the most amusing rumor about a secret wedding." "Isabel." Nicholas's voice cooled noticeably. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Victoria." Isabel's blue eyes raked over Victoria. With undisguised assessment. How refreshing. I didn't know you had a thing for struggling artists. Victoria felt her face burn, but before she could respond, Nicholas's arm tightened protectively around her. Careful, Isabel, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. You're talking about my wife. The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Isabel's smile never wavered, but she took a step back. Of course. How lovely to meet you, Victoria. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. As she glided away, Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Who was that? She asked. Someone from my past. Nicholas's. Jaw was tight. Don't worry about her. But Victoria was worrying. She'd seen something in Isabel's eyes, a calculation that suggested this encounter was far from over. The drive home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. It wasn't. Until they were back in the penthouse that Nicholas spoke again. You did well tonight, he said as they stood in the marble foyer. I felt like everyone was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. They were, but you didn't. He stepped closer, and Victoria's breath caught. Victoria? About what, Isabel? Said it doesn't matter, Victoria interrupted, though the woman's words still stung. It does matter. She was trying to hurt you, to make you feel like you don't belong, don't I? The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it. Belong, I mean, in your world. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. I'm beginning to think my world doesn't deserve you. The admission hung between them like a confession. Victoria felt something shift in the air, a current of attraction that had been building all evening, finally acknowledged. Nicholas, she whispered. He reached up to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. We agreed this would be business, we did. But I'm finding it harder and harder to remember why. Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs as he leaned closer. His lips were almost touching hers when his phone buzzed urgently. He jerked back, the moment shattered. I have to take this, he said, pulling out his phone and checking the caller ID. His face went white. It's the hospital. Victoria's blood turned to ice. Her father. Something had gone wrong with her father. Nicholas answered the call, his face grave as he listened. Victoria watched his expression, trying to read the verdict in his eyes. He hung up. She was barely breathing. What is it? She whispered. Nicholas looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, and when he spoke, his words changed everything. That wasn't about your father, he said quietly. That was about mine. He's alive, Victoria. The man I told you was dead has been in a private psychiatric facility for the past 5 years, and he's just been released. Victoria stared at Nicholas, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. Your father is alive, but you said he died when you were 15. Nicholas sank into one of the leather chairs, his head in his hands. I said he was gone. I never said he was dead. That's semantics and you know it. Victoria's voice rose with anger and betrayal. What else have you lied about? Everything. The admission was barely a whisper. Victoria, my father didn't die in a car accident. He had a complete psychotic break when I was 15. He attacked my mother, tried to kill her because he was convinced she was having an affair with his business partner. Victoria felt sick. Nicholas, I was the one who called the police. Oh, I was the one who had him committed. He looked up at her, his green eyes haunted. My mother recovered physically, but she never got over the trauma. She died 3 years later, and I've always wondered if it was really suicide, even though the official cause was an overdose of sleeping pills. Why didn't you tell me? 'Cause I needed you to marry me without questions. Nicholas stood up, pacing to the windows. My father being released changes everything. If the board of directors finds out that Robert Sterling is alive and has been institutionalized for mental illness, they'll question my fitness to run the company. The marriage clause in my grandfather's will suddenly becomes irrelevant. Victoria felt the pieces clicking together. So you found a desperate woman who would ask no questions and sign whatever you put in front of her. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Nicholas turned back to her, his expression desperate. Victoria, when I first saw your paintings 2 years ago, I was captivated. Not just by your talent, but by you. I started attending your shows because I couldn't stay away. You were stalking me. I was falling in love with you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Don't you dare use that word now. The truth. I've been in love with you for months, but I never had the courage to approach you. When I found you in that hospital, desperate to save your father, I saw an opportunity to have what I wanted while solving both our problems. Victoria laughed bitterly. How convenient. You get the wife you want and the business empire you need to protect. You don't understand. The psychiatric facility called because my father has been asking about me. He wants to see me. If he decides to surface publicly to reclaim his stake in Sterling Industries, your empire crumbles. Victoria shook her head in disgust. This was never about your grandfather's will, was it? This was about keeping your father's mental illness secret. Nicholas's silence was answer enough. I want out, Victoria said quietly. I want a divorce. You can't. The contract. I don't care about the contract. I don't care about the money. I'll find another way to pay for my father's care. No. Victoria. Please. Nicholas crossed to her, reaching for her hands. I know I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was scared. Scared you'd refuse. Scared you'd look at me differently if you knew about the mental illness in my family. So instead you decided to manipulate me when I was most vulnerable. Victoria pulled her hands free. Do you have any idea what it felt like tonight, playing the devoted wife to a man who bought me like property? It wasn't supposed to feel like that, but it did. And now I find out that even the reason you gave me was a lie. They were interrupted by the sound of the elevator opening. Victoria turned to see a man step into the penthouse, and her breath caught. He looked like an older version of Nicholas, the same green eyes and strong jawline. But there was something wild and unstable in his expression. Hello, son, Robert Sterling said, his voice carrying an edge that made Victoria's skin crawl. Nicholas moved protectively in front of Victoria. How did you get up here? I still have friends, Nicholas. Friends who remember when I built this company from nothing. Robert's eyes fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made her want to run. And who is this lovely creature? This is my wife, Victoria, Nicholas said carefully. Victoria, this is my father. Robert Sterling smiled, but it didn't reach his. Eyes, your wife? How wonderful. I wasn't invited to the wedding, of course, my own son's wedding, and I have to read about it in the gossip columns. Dad, you've been in treatment. Robert spat the word. 5 years locked away because I had the audacity to discover that the people closest to me were plotting behind my back. His gaze shifted back to Victoria. But you wouldn't do that, would you, my dear? You wouldn't conspire against family? Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. There was something deeply wrong with Robert Sterling, something that went beyond simple mental illness. I should go, Victoria said, backing toward her room. It's nonsense, Robert said, stepping between her and the hallway. We're just getting acquainted. Tell me, Victoria, do you love my son? The question hung in the air like a trap. Victoria looked at Nicholas, seeing the fear in his eyes, and realized that whatever was wrong with his father, it was worse than he'd let on. Of course she does, Nicholas said quickly. I wasn't asking you. Robert's voice turned sharp. I was asking your wife. Do you love him, Victoria? Victoria looked at Nicholas, this man who had lied to her, manipulated her, bought her like a commodity to serve his own needs. And yet, despite everything, despite the betrayal and the hurt, she realized with stunning clarity that she did love him. Somewhere in the midst of all the deception and careful contracts, she had fallen for the man who brought her coffee during her father's surgery, who held her when she cried, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. Yes, she whispered. I love him. Robert Sterling's smile was satisfied and terrifying. How touching. But love is such a fragile thing, isn't it? So easily broken by secrets and lies. He pulled out a folder from his jacket and placed it on the marble coffee table. Did you know, my dear, that your husband hired a private investigator to research you? Complete background check, financial records, psychological profile. He knew about your father's gambling debts, your mother's death, your struggles with depression after art school. He chose you specifically because you were vulnerable and desperate. Victoria felt the world tilt sideways. She looked at Nicholas, whose face had gone ashen. Is it true? She asked. Nicholas's silence was devastating. He played you perfectly. Robert continued, clearly enjoying the destruction he was causing. A few carefully timed appearances at your art shows, a convenient meeting at the hospital. He's been orchestrating this for months. Victoria felt something die inside her chest. Get out, she whispered. Victoria Nicholas started. Get out. The scream tore from her throat, raw and primal. Both of you, get out. Robert Sterling chuckled as he headed toward the elevator. Welcome to the family, my dear. And the elevator doors closed behind him. Victoria turned to Nicholas with tears streaming down her face. How could you do this to me? Victoria, please let me explain. Explain what? That you researched me like a stock purchase? That you knew about my mother's suicide and used it against me? Her voice broke. That every moment between us has been choreographed. Not every moment, Nicholas said desperately. What I feel for you is real. How would I ever know? Victoria pulled off her wedding ring and threw it at him. How would I ever know what's real and what's just another manipulation? She ran to her room and slammed the door, sliding the deadbolt home. Behind the door, she could hear Nicholas pleading. With her, but his words felt like poison now. Victoria spent the rest of the night staring out at the city lights, her world in ruins once again. By morning, she had made her decision. She was packing her few belongings when Nicholas appeared in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. Where will you go? He asked quietly. That's not your concern anymore. Victoria, my father is dangerous. He's not just mentally ill, he's vindictive. If you leave now, he'll see it as proof that our marriage was fake. He could destroy everything. Victoria turned to face him, her expression cold. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to buy a wife instead of earning one. I'll transfer the $5 million to your account today. Your father's care will be covered for life, I promise. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Victoria studied his face, memorizing the features she had grown to love despite everything. I want my life back. I want to believe in something real again. Nicholas stepped closer, his eyes pleading. We could be real. If you stay, if you give me a chance to prove that what I feel for you isn't calculated, how? Victoria's laugh was bitter. How do you prove something like that when the foundation of everything between us is built on lies? Nicholas was quiet. For a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. You're right. I don't know how. Victoria nodded, picking up her bag. Then we have nothing left to say to each other. She was almost to the door when Nicholas spoke again. I love you, he said. I know you don't believe me, and I know I have no right to say it, but I love you. It's not because you were convenient or desperate or vulnerable. I love you because you're brave enough to sacrifice everything for someone you care about. I love you because you see beauty where others see only struggle. I love you because when you looked at me for just a moment, I wasn't Nicholas Sterling the billionaire or Nicholas Sterling the CEO. I was just Nicholas, and that was enough. Victoria stopped walking but didn't turn around. Tears were flowing freely down her face now.
Ow.
If you had told me the truth from the beginning, she whispered. If you had just asked me instead of manipulating me, I would have said yes anyway. Victoria, but you didn't trust me with the truth. Without trust, love is just another four-letter word. She walked out of the penthouse and didn't look back. 6 months later, Victoria stood in a small gallery in Pioneer Square, surrounded by paintings. That told the story of a year that had changed her life forever. The exhibition was called Gilded Cages, and every piece explored themes of love, betrayal, and the price of salvation. Her father, recovered and stronger than ever, stood beside her as people moved through the gallery, studying her work with intense interest. Are you happy? James asked quietly. Victoria considered the question. She was living in a modest apartment again, working part-time at a coffee shop to pay the bills. Her father's ongoing medical care was covered by an anonymous. The donor, who she suspected was Nicholas, though she had never confirmed it. She was struggling financially again, but she was free. I'm getting there, she said finally. And Nicholas? Victoria's chest tightened at the mention of his name. She had seen articles about Sterling Industries in the business pages, how Nicholas had managed to maintain control despite his father's attempts to undermine him. There had been no mention of a divorce, though she knew the papers had been filed months ago. I try not to think about Nicholas, but you do think about him. Victoria looked at a painting across the room, one she had titled Almost Real. showed two figures dancing, their faces obscured by shadows, one reaching for the other while the other pulled away. "Every day," she admitted, Victoria James said gently. "I know what he did was wrong. The deception, the manipulation, all of it. But I also saw the way he looked at you in that hospital room. That wasn't calculated. That was a man falling in love despite himself. It doesn't matter now, doesn't it?" Before Victoria could answer, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "It's a beautiful exhibition." She turned to find Nicholas standing near the entrance, looking thinner than she remembered, but still heartbreakingly handsome in his perfectly tailored coat. He was studying the painting of the dancing figures with an expression of profound sadness. "What are you doing here?" Victoria asked. "I wanted to see your work, to see what you created from all of this." He gestured around the gallery. "It's extraordinary. You need to leave." "I know. I will, but first I need you to know something." Nicholas stepped closer, and Victoria caught the familiar scent of his cologne. "My father is back in treatment. He had another break 2 months ago, and this time I made sure he gets the help he needs instead of just locking him away." "I'm glad he's getting help, Victoria. I also need you to know that I never used the psychological profile. I had it destroyed the day after our wedding." Victoria stared at him. "What? The investigator's report? I burned it. I never read past the basic background information." Nicholas's eyes were intense on hers. "I realized that if I was going to fall in love with you, I wanted it to be with who you really were, not with some clinical assessment of your vulnerabilities." "Lying, I'm not. Ask Rebecca Walsh, my attorney. She was there when I destroyed it. She called me an idiot for burning $1 million investigation." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. "It doesn't change what you did, I know. It doesn't excuse the manipulation or the lies. Nothing can excuse that." Nicholas looked around the gallery, taking in her paintings. "But I needed you to know that what happened between us, the way I fell in love with you, that was real. Messy and complicated and probably doomed from the start, but real." He pulled an envelope from his coat and placed it on a nearby table. "The divorce papers are signed. You're free, Victoria, completely free." He turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, being married to you, even under those circumstances, were the happiest months of my life." Victoria watched him walk away, her heart breaking all over again. She picked up the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside were the signed divorce papers and a small note written in Nicholas's careful handwriting. "You were right. Love without trust is just another 4-letter word. But trust can be rebuilt if you're brave enough to try. I'll be waiting, however long it takes." And Victoria looked up to see Nicholas's figure disappearing into the Seattle night. For the first time in 6 months, she allowed herself to wonder if some cages were worth returning to, if the person holding the key was willing to earn the right to use it. She thought about forgiveness and second chances, about the difference between loving someone and trusting them, about whether a foundation built on lies could ever support something real and lasting. The answer, she realized, wasn't something she could paint or think her way to it. It was something she would have to feel her way toward, one careful step at a time. As the gallery emptied around her, Victoria held Nicholas's note against her chest and wondered if love was worth the risk of being wrong again. Outside, snow began to fall on Seattle, covering the city in a blanket of possibility. Subscribe for more emotionally intense stories like this. Comment. Would you have taken Nicholas's deal? What would you sacrifice for family? Like if this story gave you all the feels. The end.